Hello everyone, my name is Carrie, my pronouns are she, her, and welcome back to another episode of Carrie Plays Kerbal. In the last episode, we proved that we could drive on the Mun. We also made this science truck deemed the Nomad. For the main event, we landed on Duna, and in the meantime, the B team was back on Kerbin testing our first plane, where they discovered man-made horrors beyond their comprehension. And in this episode, we're going to mess around with deep space probes to finally complete our first goal of the series, unlocking the entire tech tree. But first, you're joining me as I'm launching a new rocket I've designed to carry the Nomad to another world, called the Atlas 1. So I decided to start with the easiest one, Minmus. I'm going to try something a bit different to summarize this mission with the editing. Let me know if you guys like it. Let's see how it went. We got a decent chunk of science, but as you saw, rovers are not super useful in this game. However, they are cool when they work. Unfortunately, Seek did not make it back, probably because he didn't comment on my last video, but he will respawn, so don't worry. And before we get on to the main theme of this episode, I did find out while filming this on the wiki that not only does each of the campuses in the Kerbal Space Center count as its own mini biome, but also each individual building, sometimes going as far down as individual fuel tanks and radar dishes. So I decided to get the Nomad out and tediously and painstakingly one by one perform every single experiment at every single building. This took an actual half hour. I guess that just goes to show the bureaucracy of conducting experiments in some sort of complex like this. I mean, NASA actually did some experiments in broom closets just to see if anything would change. So it's not that far off. But we got almost as much science as we did by going to Minmus. After unlocking the last techs that I really need for my probes, those being the ion engine and the most advanced probe core, I decided to get on to the main theme, where we're going to be making our first robotic missions, starting with something that I can use to track anomalies on Kerbin. In order to call the series complete, I really want to find every single Easter egg in the system, and although many of them you can just look up on the wiki or on Reddit and get the locations from there, I feel like that's not very fun. Especially when the game provides its own system of finding them, that being KerbNet. In order to use KerbNet, you just have to have a probe core that is compatible with it, and send it up to orbit the planet where you're trying to find stuff. That's exactly what this little guy will do, our first artificial satellite, the Oracle. Note that the telescope is actually not for this purpose, I just strapped it on there because it looks cool. It won't actually help us do anything. But I figure in my headcanon it's imaging Kerbin that way. Something interesting about the way we're going to launch this satellite is we're going to put it into a polar orbit. We have yet to do this, we usually go for equatorial orbits, but putting it into a polar orbit means that eventually, as Kerbin rotates under it, it will be able to scan every single square inch of the planet. The first real satellite was of course Sputnik, which launched the space race in 1957.
Today, a new moon is in the sky, a 23-inch metal sphere placed in orbit by a Russian rocket. Here, an artist's conception of how the feat was accomplished. A three-stage rocket. Number one, the booster in the class of an intercontinental missile. Its weight estimated at 50 tons. The smaller second stage took over at 5,000 miles an hour and carried on to the highest point reached. 500 miles up, the artificial moon is boosted to a speed counterbalancing the pull of gravity and released. You are hearing the actual signals transmitted by the Earth-circling satellite, one of the great scientific feats of the age.
The way the Soviets did things to start it all off was they really just took an ICBM and strapped a robot on top of it and just called it a day. Although this satellite is more based on the later American designs for Project Corona, which were spy satellites operated by the CIA and the Air Force. Luckily for us, our spy satellite uses digital imaging, which can be beamed back immediately. But when the Corona program was made, there was no such thing yet. The images taken by the satellites were actually on film that had to be recovered and developed. To get around this problem, the satellites were designed in such a way that they would launch film out of little pods. These pods would then re-enter the atmosphere and open up little parachutes. They would then be caught by the Air Force mid-air, or by the Navy after splashing down. And now that the Oracle is fully operational, we'll be able to use it to scan for Easter eggs on Kerbin, as well as keep an eye on whatever Elon Kerman is plotting against us. So now that we've got a satellite to scan our home planet, I really wanted to make some deep space probes. This way we can send them on one-way trips to gather lots of science and transmit it back, without having to worry about recovering them like we would with Kerbals. So I've created the Explorer program. The look is heavily inspired by the Voyager program, although they won't be fulfilling the same function, as KSP doesn't let you go interstellar in the stock game. So I decided to stick a bunch of science experiments on this thing, including multiple goo canisters, because with no scientist on board, we won't be able to reset them. These will utilize the new ion engines we just unlocked, which are extremely efficient, but take a very, very long time to go anywhere. For our first exploratory flyby, I wanted to go to the forgotten dwarf planet that everybody likes to pretend doesn't exist. The reason for this is because I wanted to unlock the Dres belt, as it's affectionately called by the community. After your first flyby of Dres in a save file, it can spawn a ring of asteroids around it. Even though I think Dres is a fine place to visit, a lot of the KSP community has this sort of weird inside joke where they pretend that it doesn't exist. I think the idea is that it's just gray and boring, and kind of just looks a lot like the Mun, so it doesn't really have much to offer. It's like a running bit on the subreddit too. Anytime somebody asks about like actual advice for dealing with the dwarf planet in some way, all the comments will just pretend like it's not there, or like they have no idea what they're talking about. I think Dres deserves a little respect. In the words of a great American poet, nowadays everybody wanna talk like they got something to say, but nothing comes out when they move their lips, just a bunch of gibberish, and motherfuckers act like they forgot about Dres. Although I think it does a perfectly fine job of being the analog of Ceres, a real dwarf planet in our asteroid belt. Even though the design of this probe is loosely inspired by Voyager, its function here really is much more similar to the Dawn mission. So now that the Explorer 1 has accomplished its goal of doing a flyby of Dres, it will orbit the Sun until I decide it's time to retire it. The Explorer 1 was merely a proof of concept for the much more ambitious plan I have for the Explorer 2. A grand tour of the Jool system. So at first, the only change I make is I just add a bit more fuel to the upper stage for Explorer 2. But now I've committed the cardinal sin. Too much mass, not enough thrust. Not to worry, I strap on some bigger SRBs and we're good to go. Very much inspired by the Galileo or Cassini probes, I want to send this platform on a flyby of all 5 moons of Jool, the analog of Jupiter, and perform all the experiments from space high above them and space near them. This should give us more than enough science points to finish the rest of the tech tree, as well as giving us a peek at some of the future places we'll be visiting. The fairing gets a little bit wonky, but it decides to behave eventually. Now I'm just planning our trans-Julian insertion burn. This mission here is really going to be a practical test of how well I understand the orbital mechanics of the game and can use the maneuver nodes. First of all, up until now, whenever we want to get into orbit of another body, we burn retrograde at the periapsis of that body. However, this time we're going to get 2 birds stoned by both completing a flyby of Jool's largest moon, Tylo, while also taking advantage of its gravity well to get us into an orbit of Jool. To do this, I just get our periapsis of Tylo as low as reasonably possible, and the gravity of the moon changes the trajectory of what would have been a Jool flyby to be a complete Jool orbit. Jool has 5 moons, and we are going to fly by all of them on this mission. So I run all my experiments from Tylo, and then we're on to the next moon. Next up, we get an encounter with the icy moon of Val. Next, we pass by the tiny moon of Bop. I almost accidentally crashed into it because I didn't realize that it has such an uneven surface, but we just barely pass over it after I burn radial out. And now we fly by Paul. And finally, the closest moon to Jool, the water world Lathe. Really reminds me a lot of home. I wonder if there's any life on it. I guess we'll have to go down there sometime soon and figure out. And now you can see, after our Lathe flyby, it puts us on a collision course with Jool. Not to worry, this was the plan. After Explorer 2 served its function, so now it must be retired. It's bittersweet really. It provided us all the science it could, and it did a great job of it. But we don't want to contaminate space or any of its moons by leaving this thing out here forever. So let's see how far down it can get into the gas giant. This was a very hard-working machine. After what the Explorer 2 has done for us, I would never call it a clanker. And now we say goodbye. Let's see how many points it actually got us.
Yes, science!
Thanks to the Explorer program, we complete our first goal of the series, of unlocking the entire tech tree. However, we're not done yet. Now that the Explorer 2 has been retired, I go back to the Explorer 1 for one last job. The window just happened to line up perfectly to send this thing crashing into Eve, the Venus analog. If all goes to plan, it should burn up in Eve's very thick atmosphere, while also getting us a couple more science points we don't really need, but just for the love of the game. In the next episode, we'll continue our mission to explore every single celestial body in the system. So as we watch the final moments of the Explorer 1, remember to click the like button if you liked the video, hit subscribe if you want to see more, or I will strap you to our next probe and send you on a permanent retirement. Your choice.